Well, hi, my name is Steve Stren. I'm the Executive Director for the Washington Association of Sheriffs and Police Chiefs. And we are doing a short series of questions for the top 4 polling candidates for governor of the state of Washington. And our guest is Semi Bird. Welcome, Mr. Bird.
Thank you, Steve. Good to be with you.
Thank you for being with us. Let's go ahead and jump right in. I'm going to ask you a couple of tough questions. And by the way, these were sent ahead of time to each of the candidates. The first one is that we're 51st in the nation in staffing. Crime has risen dramatically and stayed high for the last few years in the state of Washington. As governor, what specifically would you do to address the staffing crisis in law enforcement to improve public safety and ensure that law enforcement is supported and confident in doing the job?
100%. And it doesn't happen overnight, and that's important for people to understand. To find ourselves number 51, last in the nation. Recruiting and retention is a comprehensive program that often occurs within Human Resources Department. I have a graduate degree in Human Resource Development. I've been trained formally in recruiting and retention and understanding that it has to be strategically implemented, which means we start by maintaining the morale and the well-being of our officers, our troopers, our deputies on staff so that they want to stay and that others see that our staff want to stay and so that they want to stay and they want to join a team where they feel treated well and valued. And so that goes also to organizational culture. So retention is important. In terms of recruiting is more outward facing. Recruiting is also attracted by how well the department treats its staff. And so I would be proposing an outward-facing comprehensive recruitment initiative that goes not only statewide, but that goes nationwide to where we're reaching out for lateral transfers. We have that licensure reciprocity already so that lateral transfers can come in from Texas or other states, and within a short period of time, they could find themselves on the streets filling gaps. So comprehensively, bonus programs, benefit programs. People don't realize that the Washington State Patrol does not have a retirement health program. And we should be looking at those things. And so when I say comprehensive, I mean comprehensive. And so this is not something that happens overnight, but we need to make it appealing to serve. We need to do comprehensive outreach so that communities understand this is an opportunity to protect and to serve and be a part of a positive change in your community, and they want to serve in law enforcement. So,
okay. Thank you. Appreciate it, Mr. Bird. Second question is a complex one, a tough one. And I say tough because I think we're all trying to figure this one out. Much of what we see in terms of public concern about homelessness, crime, etc., relates to a lack of consequences and too few resources as well for behavioral health and addiction. Including moving drug offenses to underfunded local courts and municipal court systems, which is something our state did a couple of years ago. So first of all, do you agree, Mr. Bird, that accountability structures are insufficient for some of the things we're seeing on the street? And what does a high-performing system look like? In other words, if it's working the way it should, what does that high-performing system look like for criminal justice, behavioral health, and addiction? And as governor, what would you do to bring that about?
Yeah, currently our system isn't working. There are no consequences. B.F. Skinner's theory of operant conditioning, there's no negative reinforcement. So therefore, when you take the barriers away, people are more likely to try and to step further and further and further, and we have ourselves in a state of lawlessness. And so when it comes time to think about homelessness and addiction and mental health, well, the core root cause of homelessness is addiction. And subsequently, schizophrenia and mental health causality from serious opioid addiction. We need to start talking about prevention. We need to start talking about the separation between crime and addiction, because those are two different things. Number one, causality. Drug trafficking in Washington State. We have a fentanyl crisis in trafficking in Washington State. We have 3 cartels operating, crime syndicates operating in Washington State. We have a fusion center. We understand it's understaffed. It's underutilized in Washington State. We should be partnering with the Drug Enforcement Administration, federal judicial system, when I say that, the Department of Justice illicit finance system, to target the funding of these cartel systems, these crime syndicates, and start targeting and taking them down. Stop the flow of drugs into Washington state, and then bring in the restrictions and the enforcement of law to say prosecutors and judges, no more revolving door. We're going to hold true to the rule of law, and we're going to start prosecuting. But then now again, we find ourselves in the situation where just 2 weeks ago, we said the Department of Children, Youth, and Family Services says we have no more room for young criminals. So all those criminals that have just gone through the system that have been prosecuted for serious crime offenses, which these crime syndicates are using young people to commit because of that squish period where they can't, we, law enforcement, can't investigate, cannot utilize fully their services to render these people, get them off the streets. They're saying we can no longer house them. So what do we do with all these criminals? So our system infrastructure is dilapidated. We don't have it. There's no strategy in place. We are reactive instead of being proactive. So I would say addiction, mental health, we need to build the infrastructure there. In terms of law enforcement on the judicial side, we need to bring prosecutorial discretion, judicial discretion, and enforce the law. We need to support our men and women in law enforcement, make sure they have all the resources and the technology that they need to do their job. And we need to build the infrastructure for corrections facilities, not only for youth, but for all ages. Regional correctional facilities should be something that we should be talking about. I understand we have memorandums of agreement between different municipalities and sharing correction space, but that's a patchwork. We need a comprehensive approach. And so I guess to that I would say, I have a strategy and a plan for homelessness. Law enforcement separated out from that. We need to give them the chance to do their jobs. We need to hold drug dealers accountable. We need to make dealing in fentanyl a Class A felony, mandatory minimum, and make sure that they know that we're playing for serious.
Okay, thank you. Third question, pursuits.
Yes.
Pursuits have been a hot topic for the last couple of years in our state. It's been a focus of legislation since 2021. So with the recent passage of I-2113, which started as a citizens initiative to the legislature, do you believe that there's more that needs to be done through legislation or regulation on this issue? And then expanding on that a little bit, would you introduce, support, or sign into law a bipartisan measure that we supported, by the way, last year to provide additional tools and consequences so that pursuit is not the only option when someone flees, which would include things like technology and greater sentences? And then finally, do you have anything to say to crime victims whose offenders fled because law enforcement has been so limited in their response options?
Yeah, so I would say what you're echoing part of my strategic plan for supporting law enforcement. Technology, 100%, without a doubt. Tracking technology. We're utilizing it in municipalities like Pierce County right now successfully. So let's capitalize on that. Drone technology, surveillance technology that doesn't violate the rights of citizens, where we angle our cameras or our surveillance directly at vehicles using algorithmic response to our systems that triggers stolen vehicle, and then tracking, and then we have response. I would also support proactive. We've had this and we've experimented with different law enforcement agencies across the nation where you have proactive teams, law enforcement officers on a proactive special trained teams that they're like an emergency response team, separate from SWAT, but simply that they're proactively ready, whether it's traffic interdiction, drug interdiction, gang interdiction. We're going to start pressing at those teams again so that, they have all the tools that they need to be effective. We need to get a handle on law enforcement in Washington State, especially when we look at rape up 51%, murder up 95%, property crime up 73%, retail #1 in the nation, auto theft #3 in the nation, and that has a causality to insurance cost. So for all the citizens that are out there that are hesitating in, should I support our law enforcement? Should I get behind these bills and these initiatives? The answers are you should, you absolutely should, because we are all paying for this.
Okay. And I'm not fact checking you on the numbers you just cited. I don't know, but again, all those things would be something that can be checked. Number 4, since the implementation of House Bill 1140, which was passed in 2021. This is the one about juvenile questions.
Yes.
Law enforcement has reported a lot of problems in attempting to work with juveniles, both offenders and victims. So current state law requires that law enforcement contact legal counsel on a juvenile's behalf before taking any voluntary statement from, or evidence, I should say, from a juvenile. So there's been a lot of unintended consequences, such as homicides, including one in West Seattle, which really cannot be further investigated because of prohibitions on talking to juveniles. Families are upset because there's not justice in some of these cases. Would you support, as governor, changes to this statute?
100%. 100%. As a matter of fact, I am going to support change. I will show up January of 2025, after we win the election in November, with a youth crime bill. That's how serious I am about this. We have situations, and this happens nationwide, where we have cartels, crime syndicates. And I use these terms quite a bit because what we're seeing in South and Central America and other places where I've operated, we see that these organizations take advantage of young people, and they do it intentionally because young people fall under the guise or restrictions of the law. This bill is one such restriction, to where law enforcement, you apprehend a young person who is clearly, we have probable cause that a crime has been committed, but yet the officer is restricted from doing further investigation that can lead to more arrests and or assisting in solving the crime because of the age of the offender. That is inhibiting the prosecution of crime. It's inhibiting law enforcement doing their jobs. We have individuals who know and are taking advantage of this, and this is why youth crime has increased exponentially, going back to the problems we have right now with Echo Glen, our youth facility, Green Hill, another youth facility, that are over max capacity, and then the state saying, we can no longer take young people into these correctional facilities because we're maxed. So right now, as we speak, Washington can no longer arrest any other youth for crimes from this second moving forward unless you plan on housing them in your local jail for where you arrest them, in a holding detention cell. Or what are we going to do? We're going to prosecute them and then put them back in that detention cell because the state says we have no more room. So we need to remove that law. We need to bring a comprehensive reform to the law. We need to bring youth prosecution forward with caveats to say rehabilitation must be a part of youth crime implementation and prosecution. But we cannot just sit by and allow these syndicates to take advantage of our young people and further target them early on to go into a life of crime. We're creating a problem that's getting out of control.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Bird. Here's the fifth question. As governor, this is about violent extremism. What policies would you support to ensure that violent extremism is not allowed to be used in connection with a range of issues, including politics, religion, gender relations? And how would you support enforcement of the law to promote public safety so incidents of that type of violence are not conflated with freedom of expression?
I know that the current Attorney General proposed House Bill 1133, I believe it was, Violent Extremism Commission. I think that's unconstitutional, at the least, to say that we will have an agency that will determine what is or who is a violent extremism or what is the nexus for that. We have laws, and the laws say that. Well, we have laws that say in the RCWs, you cannot cause disturbances. You cannot. You have a freedom of speech, you have a freedom of will, but you cannot go so far as to being offensive. Our laws are sufficient for regulating proper behavior as long as we're enforcing our laws. I say that we get back to enforcing our laws without looking for reasons to intentionally target and then label citizens who may or might be expressing their rights. For example, religious freedom. Article 1, Section 11 of the Washington State Constitution says we have a freedom of consciousness with all things spiritual or with beliefs. And so what one person believes, another person may not, but it does not take away that person's right to believe as they choose. So I say we must delve carefully and not to violate the constitutional rights of citizens. We must be careful about labeling and segregating one another in society, and then we must focus on enforcing the laws, holding people accountable to the rigors of the law.
Do you think, just to clarify, do you think that violent extremism is a problem on both the right and the left?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I think violent extremism, and again, the terminology, and what would deem it, we would say, well, violence itself speaks for itself. A person who commits, fourth-degree assault could be literally spitting on someone or throwing something at someone. So violence, and then the word extremism, there's so much subjectiveness. Let's define it down to what we're talking about. Are we talking about radicalized groups who have set forth to undermine government or undermine the rule of law or to undermine? Let's identify it clearly, but be very careful that we do not take away or compromise the individual rights of citizens, their free speech. It's something that it's keenly important, but absolutely. And I think because of this discourse, this animosity, that people feel that they must somehow cling to these organizations, that in and of itself is a tell that our society has deviated from civility and human decency, that we feel we have to pick a side. We should not. America, a beautiful nation, rich with culture, different culture. There's plenty of choices here to find a home. One flag, one beautiful flag that represents all citizens, all cultures, all races, and all religions. That is what we should all find refuge and peace in.
Thank you, Mr. Bird. Shifting gears a little bit, one impediment to improving culture within law enforcement agencies is the ability to discipline and terminate employees when necessary. And of course, that needs to be fair. But very strong labor rights in this state, this is a strong labor rights state, sometimes make that difficult. Do you agree with that statement, first of all? And what would you do as governor to change that?
I'm a human resource professional, so on multiple fronts, certified and degreed. Policy. And so even with, I've done bargaining agreements, so I understand how union representative workers, labor works. Policy. Just because you're represented by a bargaining agreement does not mean that you can circumvent policy or the rules. And so that's negotiated in. And so we make sure that we have comprehensive labor relations, and we negotiate it into our bargaining agreements, but we also establish policy. Accountability of performance of work and behavior and ethics are always something that should be focused on when we do our bargaining agreements. And it's often overlooked because people say, well, this is about benefits. Well, sure, let's focus on the benefits, but let's also ensure that we understand that within the bargaining agreement, the rules must be followed, because this doesn't just reflect on one person, it reflects on the entire force per se. So if a person violates the civil rights of a citizen, well, then we must bring accountability forthwith and without hesitation. But it must be fair. It must be fair. And it should be fair in a sense that a person is not guilty until proven innocent. That person is indeed and in fact innocent and until proven guilty, because now you're talking about a person's life and livelihood. And I want to go as far as to say additionally, in particular with police officers, in the case of officers in the past who have been pulled off the streets because a call went sideways, and so it gets investigated, rightfully so. But no shadows on that officer. It's an investigation. It should be an administrative action. Just a pause to get the facts, and then that officer should be released, not over an extreme long period of time. Do the job, do your investigation, either take an action or release that officer back to work, and do not release the officer back to work with a shadow over their heads. This is serious. You're talking about a person's life and a person's livelihoods. I know of cases where it has been just as bad for an officer who was innocent, but it languished out because they didn't have enough time or they took too much time to investigate. That should never be a case. when an officer's life and livelihood is on the line, address it quickly, fairly, judiciously. Let's get a system in place. But you're talking about people's lives,
Right.
and the same fairness for a citizen as well.
Mm-hmm.
That they want to deal with it. We want to be fair. We want it to be open and transparent, but we don't want it languished out. We want it to be dealt with the right way.
Gotcha. Thank you. Last question.
Yes.
Public trust continues, as you know, to be a top priority for law enforcement. What do you believe you can do as governor to promote public trust between communities and law enforcement agencies and the officers who are there to serve them? How can you, in whoever our governor is, what role can they take to improve that trust?
I'll start on day one with a resolution, a heartfelt resolution written. It'll be demonstrated personally, physically. I'll be engaged. I'll be going to the different academies and participating. They will see me out and about, engage with our law enforcement, demonstrating my love and respect and support for our law enforcement throughout the state consistently, that I have full faith and support in them. I will support a comprehensive outreach program of law enforcement. I would like to have a comprehensive statewide recruiting and retention tied to that outreach, where we have things like law enforcement display teams, where they're out engaging with young people all over the state in fairs and all these different events. And yes, it'll be fun. And yes, it's going to take some resources to do it. But we want people to understand that law enforcement is there to protect and to defend and to support. And our society needs them. We need you. And we need you to come forward from your community and represent. Starting with our school resource officers in schools. We need them. We need more of them. And so, yeah, it starts with the chief executive officer demonstrating his, in my case, unequivocal support, admiration, respect, and love for our law enforcement professionals. And then it goes further into what we're going to do over a period of time to show people and bring more community involvement in as well. I want to bring back the Explorer programs. I want to create a pipeline from youth, from even middle school with mentorship programs, all the way through high school and to junior college pipeline, right to the academies. Let's reverse this, because it's an honorable career, and it's something that our society must have. What an honorable, and I want to end with this. I want everybody to understand that law enforcement professionals encounter more hardship, engage with more post-traumatic stress than any other occupation out there. And I've been a Special Forces Green Beret in combat, but imagine doing a job day after day after day after day. And all you deal with was engaging in sometimes and often meeting people at their worst. And you deal with this and you process this and you care. And then you go home to your family. We don't often think about that burden that a law enforcement professional takes on and lives with for us. And I hope that people out there will take a pause to give grace for our men and women in law enforcement for what they do. And I appreciate you, Steve.
Thank you. I appreciate your time.
Absolutely.
You have a busy schedule, and I say this to each of the folks that we've talked to and is willing to stand. Thank you for your willingness to serve. It's challenging. And we thank you for your time today. And again, the purpose of all of this is to just center public safety and make sure that people have a chance to get more information from each of our candidates. And again, Mr. Bird, thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Steve. I appreciate you. Thank you.